think I'm about 10 minutes late, 10, 11, 12 minutes late. I was actually just busy with research, got quite caught up in it. How's everyone doing? Stacey, good to see you. Stephanie, hi. Bria, good to see you. Bria, you upgraded to a moderator. Inspired of because of Peggy, hi. All your girls ready, steady. That's quite funny. Belinda van den Heefer, good to see you. So just to let you guys know, I've once again gotten that error message. I have restarted my browser, so I really don't know there are probably all sorts of steps one's got to take to sort this out. So today we're going to talk about the 5 crucial mistakes of Rob Hall. Rob Hall was from the adventure consultant side, competing essentially against Mountain Madness, who was Scott Fisher's. I just want to get an idea here. How many of you know the story? Whether I need to kind of reiterate and give you some backstory, just jump right into the mistakes. So those who know the story put up a 1, those who don't put a 2. Timmy, why are you licking my hand? I don't have anything on my hand. Hey, what you doing? I don't know why it's got this loving feeling. So everyone except Stacey's and Yo knows. Okay. So I'm going to try and briefly give you guys a little bit of backstory, okay? Because I'm a little bit late, I'm not going to spend too much time on, fluff and just talking about stuff, irrelevant stuff. So for you guys who are not aware, I'm just going to quickly let you know. So some of you do know the story. Some of this might surprise you. When Rob Hall summited Everest on May 10th, it was his 5th time on the roof of the world. It was like a world record. He was the most accomplished Western, in other words, non-Sherpa climber. So he'd been actually on Everest more than any other Western climber in history. So he was kind of a big deal. And he kind of had nicknames like the Show and what's the other one? I know Krakauer described him as the big cheese on the toilet at base camp, where basically a lot of people were using the adventure consultants lavatory, and then Hall asked him to write a note just saying, please, this is our kind of facility. And then Krakauer wrote the note and signed it the big cheese, which he kind of was, right? So I think something else just to mention, he was widely regarded as the most competent guide in mountaineering. And to that, you kind of got to compare Scott Fisher, it was his first time, 1996 was his first time guiding up Everest. He'd obviously had experience, but it was his first time guiding. So Scott Fisher was sort of a strong climber, but he was kind of modeling himself on this expert guide, this competent guide, this most famous guide. Timmy, please stop licking my hand. I don't know, you've got food. And so one thing that I think is really interesting is the dynamic between the journalist and the guide, kind of respectively. So what I mean is, originally Krakauer was going to go with Scott Fisher. He ended up going with Rob Hall. Rob Hall was the most competent guide. Scott Fisher actually ended up with more clients on the top, and his client, his journalist, Krakauer, actually asked permission, do you mind if I kind of climb ahead of everyone, which is more the style of Scott Fisher's group, and also it was more the style of Scott Fisher's group, and also he's throwing me off, this animal. What was I going to say? Just the style of Scott Fisher's group, and also the Scott Fisher group climbed ahead of the other group, right? Meaning at the balcony, Mountain Madness caught Adventure Consultants, Timmy, and then passed them. So you kind of had this fast climbing journalist. You also had a slow climbing journalist, but the fast climbing journalist was kind of on the wrong team. He was climbing with the slower team. Does that make sense? So in two respects, Krakauer was better suited to the other group. The speed that he was climbing, and also the approach of, you can sort of go on ahead. You don't sort of need to be kind of with us, right? And that brings us to quite an interesting thing dealing with passivity. We spoke about, Tamika, we spoke about being passive aggressive in a previous video dealing with true crime, and it's really interesting how it comes up in this story. And so this is a quote from John Krakauer talking about this leadership style in Into Thin Air. So he says, I'm quoting from his book, he says, quote, "Passivity on the part of the clients had thus been encouraged throughout our expedition. Sherpas put in the route, set up the camps, did the cooking, hauled all the loads. This conserved our energy and vastly increased our chance of getting up Everest, but I found it hugely unsatisfying," end quote. Now, what that's really all about is the passivity that Krakauer experienced, but you must remember it's kind of par for the course. So whether he was on the one expedition or the other, there would nevertheless be the Sherpas doing a lot of the work, setting up camp, cooking, bearing the load, right? And so, but I think there's also a difference between the one expedition and the other, meaning one group, one leader would be more in charge, more in control than the other. And so that can increase the passivity even more. In other words, nobody climbs, nobody does anything until I say so. Nobody, we're going to take a rest break here. And, it's all under the sort of, the control of the leader. Whereas you could have another leader, which you did with Scott Fisher, who it was a little bit different. It wasn't like he was there to not lead, or he was there and he was casual, although I think even if he was there, he would have been casual. But Scott Fisher, a lot of the time, was somewhere else. He was just almost leading from a distance, and he was sort of allowing them to do their thing. And in the movie Everest, he does say, and I think it's true, he does say when Rob Hall approaches him and says, let's work together, let's merge on Summit Day. And Scott Fisher sort of says, I don't know, man, you're a hand holder, meaning it as a compliment. You're one of the best, but that's not my way of doing it. I'm far more flexible. And so just in terms of that, one wonders whether Scott Fisher wouldn't have been the better outfit. The Adventure Mountain Madness would have been the better outfit for this, right? I'm just getting a bit distracted by what you guys are talking about here. Okay, so mods, can you guys just get onto this? I'm not quite sure what you guys are talking about. Corin, Levi, good to see you here. Peggy, the only guys who should be climbing so high is Anatoly without any oxygen. Lobsang, as far as I know, is also not climbing without oxygen, and quite amazingly, I think Scott Fisher and Neil Beidelman weren't really climbing until just before Camp 3 to actually conserve the oxygen supply to conserve the bottled oxygen. Snorky Lou says, before leaving base camp for the summit push, Rob instructed everyone on his team to climb in close proximity. Well said. And that resulted in John, Mike, and Ang to stop and wait in the cold 3 times, 30 to 90 minutes. That's a good point. One thing that is absolutely kind of incontrovertible is that on summit day, there was a heck of a lot of waiting. Lou Kashishka, in his book, this book, After the Wind, complained that at one point they waited 2 full hours. And that kind of brings up a really interesting thing about whose fault was it that the fixed ropes weren't fixed? Was it the Sherpa's fault? Was it the leader's fault? Was it because they merged? You could even go right to the beginning and say, was it because of the heavy snow and the 2 Sherpas from both expeditions kind of running into trouble? So you had, I don't know if you guys remember, you had one Sherpa, I think his name was Tenzing, on the Adventure Consultants group that fell. I think he fell 150 feet. I think he broke a leg. But this is early in April, and they needed 35 Sherpas to they needed about 4 to get him out of the crevasse, but then they needed about 35 to sort of rescue him out of the Khumbu icefall. And what that involved was putting him onto a ladder. So like lashing him kind of onto a ladder and then carrying this ladder through the Khumbu icefall, which at that point hadn't really been properly secured. So really early on, you had these resources, Sherpa resources, being exhausted on, an injury. And then you also had the injury with Scott Fisher. So you could go right to the beginning and say the problem right at the end started right at the beginning. But then there are all these other crucial mistakes as well. Are you guys ready for me to hit on the 5 crucial mistakes, or do you want me to give a little bit more background? Lots of red flags. Laura Swarenka, good to see you here. Cat Jersey, Shore High. Snorky says, instead of waiting, Mike and Ang Dorje could have fixed ropes. Even John could have helped, but Rob's instructions were to wait for all to catch up instead. Peggy, thanks very much. Thanks a lot, Peggy. Snorky is absolutely right there, and that actually is something I wanted to talk about here, is that John Krakauer, even in his book, said, he was sort of at the top. He was in the front of the queue waiting, and ropes needed to be fixed. And he actually had the technical knowledge. Krakauer was a good technical climber. He climbed Denali and so on. So he was quite a strong, fearless climber. He just wasn't that experienced at very high altitude. Nevertheless, he was one of the first climbers of the entire group that day to the summit. I think he was actually second to the top, and he was one of the first back down of the group that summited. He was either first or second. So he was a really strong climber, and he was actually in a position to fix the ropes. And the reason he didn't was because Rob Hall had basically said absolutely not. And again, it's like, if I'm not there, you must do what I say. And so I wonder if Krakauer had been on Scott Fisher's expedition, whether Scott wouldn't have said, hey, help us out there, kind of thing. And that could have changed everything. That could have saved everyone 2 hours, right? And that's quite a big deal. So, Snorky Lou, you do know that it was ultimately Anatoly, it was ultimately the Mountain Madness dudes who sorted out the problem. It was Neil Beidelman and Anatoly Beaucrief. So the Sherpas in the end never actually fixed the ropes, which is quite shocking if you think about it. That on summer day, there were no fixed ropes for that group, and I think that almost sets you up for disaster. Even if the weather hadn't been so bad, I think the weather made things worse, but that human error was avoidable. They could have saved themselves 2 hours. So look at some of your comments here. Donald Duck, some of these names. Laura Thompson, I read that a mountaineer is going to be exploring a different route from base camp on the Nepal side. Laura, you can basically climb Everest from two sides. It's the Nepal side and the Tibetan side. The Tibetan side has 3 laddered sections. So there are some quite steep sections, but then you literally climb up ladders that have actually been left there. And the other side's got the Hillary step, which doesn't have a ladder, but which might have one. And some people are sort of debating, are you ruining the experience by putting a ladder there, or should you have the ladder there, given how many people come to grief there or lose their lives, or the bottlenecks that occur there? So what do? Do you change Everest to make it more accessible, or do you say no, leave it the way it is, the degree of difficulty is necessary, kind of thing, to make it a challenge? Okay, so Donald Duck says, you've gotten me so interested in this, I've ordered Into Thin Air. Well, you're going to find Into Thin Air a really riveting narrative, one of the best books maybe you've ever read. I seem to remember when I read it almost continuously and then through the night. And then I maybe got 2 or 3 hours sleep and then I read the rest. So it was almost like climbing Everest, reading the book. You just went right through it. And then what you may find if you found Into Thin Air, like you want more, you probably would want to follow that up by reading The Climb. And that's when the whole thing becomes quite intriguing, when you realize Krakauer's story wasn't the whole story. Anyway, I think a lot of you know this. Polly B says, I'm halfway through your book, Neverest. So at the moment, I'm also doing an audiobook of Neverest. I've narrated up to chapter 19. That's on Patreon. It's on the $10 tier. So Yvonne Phillips, do we know why the ropes never got fixed by the Sherpas? It's quite a complicated answer to that question. I think the short answer is, this is the short answer, is that one Sherpa wasn't there. So two Sherpas from 2 expeditions were supposed to work together, and that was Ang Dorje, the Siddha of Adventure Consultants, and Lobsang Jangbu, the Siddha of the 23-year-old Siddha of Mountain Madness. And they didn't really like each other. The Sherpas didn't like each other. The one was older, experienced and older, but the other one was younger and like kind of a showboat. Lobsang was sort of widely regarded as he was going to be a legend. He was going to be, in fact, Scott Fisher said he was going to be the next Reinhold Messner, because he was a guy who seemed incredibly strong. He could climb without oxygen and so on. And one thing that happened with Lobsang was he was caught behind. He was carrying a lot of the other journalists' things like a satellite phone. So, for example, Lobsang was carrying a 30-pound satellite phone and all the things that go with it, because Sandy L. Pittman was going to do internet dispatches. She was going to try and blog from 26,000 feet or Camp 4. And of course, when they tried to do it, the phone didn't even work. So it was a lot of wasted energy. There's a lot more to why Lobsang was exhausted. There's a lot more to that story. It's not really what we're going to be talking about in this episode. this is more about the non-Sherpa side of it, Rob Hall and all the rest. But I'll talk to you a little bit more about that a little bit later on in this. Stephanie says he will be bringing them out in paperback, and Neverest is coming out in audiobook in about 2 weeks and in paperback as well. Up to chapter 19 narrating Neverest on Patreon, if you guys are interested. Chapter 19 is quite a powerful, fascinating chapter. It's called Hall of Fame, and it deals with the backstory of Rob Hall, how he grew up in New Zealand. He dropped out of school at the age of 14. He was someone who advised a camping company on sleeping bags and I guess tents and camping equipment, and they hired him as a product designer, I think at the age of 17, so he's quite young. So he sort of directed seamstresses in their work, but he was also someone who did some incredible climbing, and then a big breakthrough for him came in, I'm not 100% sure if it was 1990 or 1987, somewhere around there. I think he was climbing with Peter Hillary, the son of Edmund Hillary. And as a result of that, he became a sort of legend in New Zealand. His face was like on cereal boxes or whatever, and everybody knew who he was, and that sort of set up his guiding business, that publicity. And so Hall was one of the first and one of the few climbers who got the amount of sponsorships and got the amount of money where he was actually making money out of climbing, where he was sponsored and all that. And you actually see it a lot. You see on Instagram and so on, you see a lot of guys trying to do that. It's an extremely hard life, extremely dangerous life, where you climb and then your sponsors expect you to take bigger risks, and your audience expect you to do something more exciting or more brave. But if you do, then your brand grows and more sponsors want to be associated with you and you make more money. But what's happening is it's becoming more and more dangerous, right? So what I wanted to just say with John Krakauer and the passivity is you had these clients that were used to being passive, and on that day, Summit Day, it kind of required something else. It required decisiveness, it required determination, it required everything but passivity, right? Marie Moller, not yet, but getting there. Okay, so Krakauer said, he felt sometimes that he wasn't really climbing, that surrogates were doing it for him, and that is a little bit part of the experience. I know when I climb Kilimanjaro, you carry like a day pack, and it's very light. You've just got a water bottle in there and maybe some biscuits or a piece of chocolate, and maybe an extra layer of clothing, but it's really minimal stuff that you're carrying. Meanwhile, the guides there are carrying extremely heavy loads, just very heavy backpacks with food in it, and some carrying backpacks filled with wood and kindling for fire, others carrying pots and pans, others carrying all sorts of various equipment that you should be carrying, but now they're carrying. And some climbers don't like that. They sort of feel, I want to be self-reliant kind of thing. And that is exactly what Everest needs, is someone who wants that. But you've, of course, got other clients who are maybe in their 50s, and quite a lot of adventure consultants clients were. I think John Task was 56, Frank Fishbeck was 53. And it's not the end of the world, but an older client compared to a younger client is probably going to be more inclined to say, can you help me out with this? Or can can I rest some or whatever? And so that aspect comes into it as well. I must say, if I had to climb Aconcagua, I would I wouldn't mind someone carrying my pack. I'm not quite sure how it works there, but I do know they make use of mules to some extent, and I quite like that idea. But you do get your sort of hardcore climbers that they want to climb it all themselves, and they want to do it in a certain time, and they want to sort of set records and so on. And what is quite interesting with Krakauer is he quotes Rob Hall saying to Helen Walton when they left Camp 4, basically saying to her, we're going to set records today. And, it was going to be a personal record for himself in terms of, he was now going to be a climber who was the most, with the most Everest summits in the world, Western climber, and now he's going to add another one to that. And I remember, I think last week, I think on the live, someone said, why on earth did Scott Fisher need to summit? Like, what was the point of that when, he got, he had 100% success rate. All of his clients summited. Of course, Sandy Hill needed quite a lot of help. But why did Scott Fisher summit when it wasn't really necessary? He was sick, he was tired, he was at the bottom, it was late. And I think part of the answer was they're trying to set these records, they're trying to get themselves on the leaderboard. And Rob Hall was already kind of ahead of him. His guiding expeditions were more reputable, and he was kind of a legend, and certainly on Everest. And Scott Fisher wanted kind of the same thing, to be a well-known name, and also like if Rob Hall had 6 summits or whatever it was, and then Scott Fisher might have had 3 or 4, but to not have it that day meant he would need to make up for it later. Does that make sense? So someone said definitely ego, but it's beyond ego. It's also you're trying to keep up your track record. How's it going to sound if your journalist says, well, he got all the climbers up to the summit, but he didn't get up. Why didn't you get to the top? I was actually feeling a bit sick. Well, I'm not going to go with you next year, kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? There's just a couple of things I want to get through here. Let's just go to your comments for a second. Bria says, Patreon is the best. I learned so much. Donald Duck, in my opinion, it was because they had journalists with them, so they had to break the rules they normally follow. Absolutely. Catherine Day, Lean Gamelgard, Beck Weathers, and Luke Shishka also wrote books about the experiences. It's funny, you've got some people that you see them everywhere. You see them in documentaries, and then there are others that you just never see. For example, Clef Skooning, you almost never see. Martin Adams, you never see. I've found recently, I found a little bit of footage of Tim Madsen. Tim Madsen, you don't see that much. He was, I think, in a relationship with Charlotte Fox. But Tim Madsen, for example, said that Beck Weathers, when they were in the huddle, at one point stood up. Now, bear in mind, the wind was screaming over the South Col. Stood up and sort of put his arms out, and the next thing he was sort of flung by the wind, and he sort of went head over feet because the wind caught him. But the fact that he stood up like that with his hands out is kind of crazy, but that is what he's doing. And so what is quite interesting is one climber will talk about what another climber did, like that climber did something really crazy or really dumb. And then that climber will talk about another climber saying, Sandy was terrified, I don't want to die. And then that climber will, and you don't really have the climber himself or herself saying the things that the other climbers are saying about them, almost like the most embarrassing things, you know what I mean? Because they are the heroes of their own story. Catherine Perez, I would have more respect for a leader who recognizes their weaknesses and would choose them to lead me to the summit. Well, Catherine, that was Rob Hall. He was someone who did turn back from the summit in 95, and so that was the case. So doing it twice in a row would have been, I think, quite disappointing for him. KCC says, I've trekked Karakoram to China through Hindu Kush. I spent 6 months in India, 5 months in Pakistan, 1 month in Nepal. I looked at the scene. That's interesting. I actually wanted to, I wanted to do the Annapurna circuit as part of research for my fourth book on the Everest disaster. And I wanted to do it with Kami Rita, who's the most accomplished climber. I was actually in touch with him. The whole idea was to do the hike as a but also learn about the Sherpas through Kami Rita, and also get an on-the-ground feel for it, and then share that with my readers in my fourth book on the Everest disaster. That was kind of the plan. KCC says, Northern Pakistan, Husna Valley is stunning. Is that near K2? Because my father hiked, I think, to the base camp of K2. He went to Pakistan and we got some pretty incredible photos. You look at those photos and it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe this is planet Earth kind of thing. Donald Duck says, was the man known as Green Boots part of the 1996 Everest disaster? Good question. Yes, he was. He was an Indian fellow, and he was part of, he was one of 3 Indians that lost their lives. So he was part of the death toll. Okay, so are you guys ready to deal with the 5 crucial mistakes? I see we just passed the half-hour mark. So obviously this is my opinion. This is based on a certain amount of research. Some of it's quite deep, some of it's quite cursory. It's obviously my opinion. It will be interesting to hear, for example, from Snorky Lou, what you think. But my number 1 crucial mistake is the poaching of Krakauer, meaning I think that the biggest mistake Rob Hall made was poaching Krakauer from Mountain Madness, right? And that actually comes up in the movie where the 2 of them encounter one another for the first time at base camp, meaning in the dramatization in the movie, Rob Hall's character meets Scott Fisher, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and they sort of talk about the first thing they talk about when they see each other is the journalist. And the one guy says, I think Sandy Hill is more easy on the eye than John Krakauer. And then the Rob Hall character says, hey, I didn't steal your journalist. And so he's quite defensive. He says, I didn't steal your journalist. Outside contacted me, right? But the question does come up, was he aware? Did Outside say, confidentially, we did go to Mountain Madness, but what can you offer us? So all I'm saying is, it may not be an intentional mistake, meaning Rob Hall may not have known, but he may have known later on. He may have known eventually through the grapevine. But whether he knew it or didn't, it was, I think, a mistake. I think if Krakauer was on Scott Fisher's team, bear in mind, Scott Fisher had a almost all-American team, and also Scott Fisher's team all summited. Even Sandy Hill, who wasn't that strong, also summited, where you had a lot more of a mixed bag from Rob Hall's team. He had a very low success rate, basically Yasuka Namba was really his only summit success besides Krakauer, and then she lost her life. Bear in mind, on his team there were people like Beck Weathers who quit at the balcony, I think, because of vision problems. You also had Frank Fishbeck, Lucas Shishka, and John Task also just quitting, just saying, look, it's taking too long, but they basically quit. So adventure consultants were slow and they kind of got behind, and there were delays. So if you were not slow, if you were climbing fairly quickly, then you could handle those delays. But if you were slow and there were delays, then it was going to be a problem. So I don't know what you guys think. I think having Krakauer on the Adventure Consultants team, this free-spirited climber on this really controlled team of the sort of hand-holder, I don't think that was a good situation. One does wonder if Sandy Hill ended up on Rob Hall's team, what would have happened there? I mean, that could have been really, really interesting. Donald Duck, does TCRS have a Discord server? I'm happy to make one if you're interested. Yeah, that's fine if you want to do that. I have done Discord a couple of times. Snorky Lou, yes, it was the first and biggest mistake. Okay, it's interesting that you agree with that. KCC, I'm British, by the way. I've traveled not climbing, trekking, just seeing all mountains without ego. I'm 60 now. It's my memory. Oh, I see. I kind of have the same approach to Aconcagua. I don't mind going there and not reaching the summit. I don't mind having the experience, and if I don't get to the top, I'd like to get to the top, but if I don't, it will still have been a trip, and you know, that's what you want to do. Now I've got to say, I think all of that is fair to say for anyone. It's fair for me to say it. It's fair for Rob Hall to say it. Rob Hall, there's actually footage of him in base camp giving a meeting, or a kind of addressing a meeting of all the expedition leaders. I think there were 14 expeditions in 1996, and basically saying to them, you know, Scott Fisher may not be comfortable being the policeman, well, I'll be the policeman. Well, that was exactly what was needed. In 1996, on May 10th, you needed a policeman to say, hey, go and set up the ropes. You shouldn't be down here. Go and set up the ropes. You need to turn around. You need to do this. For example, when Beck Weathers stopped climbing, okay, you need to go down right now. Your day's done. Now you need to go down. No nonsense of sit here in the snow and get cold. I mean, when I think it was Mike Groom found Beck Weathers, he was like covered in snow. What are you doing sitting in the snow for hours when you could have gone down and gotten into the tent and now you've been taken care of? Instead, Beck Weathers gets himself into a situation where he's already suffering from exposure before the whole huddle scenario, right? Snorky Lou, it was a mistake. Age gives us a different perspective. Stacey says, my daughter climbs. Some of her experiences are amazing. Okay. Snorky Lou, the other mistake that is comparable to bringing a journalist on board was the combination of order to climb close to one another while doing it together with another big team. Yeah, I mean, that is another thing. Some people said the problem was that the teams mixed up, and the certain issues that came up, and part of them were Sherpa issues, where Sherpas feel that they have a different status, and they resent one another in a sense. And there's quite a lot to talk about that, but I'm not going to talk about that right here. So the number one crucial mistake was poaching Krakauer. And as I say, technically it's not necessarily his mistake if he didn't know that what had happened. I just think it's unlikely that he didn't know. I think it's unlikely that it would never have come up. as I said, is dramatized in Everest. The other thing, how you would expect it to come up is he sees Scott Fisher and he sees there's a journalist on her team as well. So it had to have come up, absolutely. So the other thing that I think is quite interesting, that's almost on a par perhaps with number one, is Mountain Madness poached Lobsang. So Lobsang was actually someone who knew Rob Hall quite well, and I think Rob Hall had used Lobsang previously, and now Lobsang was on Mountain Madness. So you could actually argue that there was poaching of people by both sides, right? Simples, Meerkat, Christine, thanks for joining us. I wonder what you were watching. Okay, and so now we go to number two, which we sort of addressed here. The fact that they didn't set up fixed ropes at the summit in advance, right? They did it, or they intended to do it on summit day. Now, my impression is that, Snorky Lou, you can probably help me out here. My impression is that it's just not done on summit day anymore. It's done like what happened this year, 2021, is the Sherpas summited, I think in early May, it happens like a week in advance, that a Sherpa only team go up, and it might be Sherpas from quite a few different teams, and they then set up the ropes and everything, and the Sherpas then become the sort of the first people to summit Everest of that season. And this year you actually had them celebrating, and you actually had pictures of them on the summit and all that kind of thing. And I think that's only fair. I think they should get recognition and attention, because what they're doing is the hardest and the worst. Discord group made, I can't post link on here. Is there a place I can post the link? I suppose you can tweet it at Crime Rocket. You can do something like that. So it does make sense to do it in advance. And this whole deal where they did it not only on summit day, so the actual idea was that the Sherpas would leave, I think some people say 90 minutes, others say an hour before. It's what some of the team members understood, that the Sherpas would leave, like when the climbers set out from Camp 4, the Sherpas would go out an hour earlier. Some say 2 hours, some say an hour and a half, whatever. But the point is, the Sherpas would leave early, and they would kind of do their thing. And that didn't happen. Ang Dorje didn't leave, and Lobsang didn't leave. So they simply didn't go out before everyone else. And you've got to kind of ask, why didn't that happen? And we do know Lobsang was asked, and that is something that I am addressing. I might as well make that announcement, because I feel like I'm avoiding it all the time. I'm currently working on Everest 4. It's going to be a shortish book, but I'm already at 17,000 words. I'll probably try and push by 25,000 words. So yeah, you can expect Everest 4 to be out probably in the next week to 10 days. As I said, it's going to be a shortish book, but it's dealing with the Sherpa side of the story. It's almost just focusing on the Sherpas, not like nothing besides that, but it's just giving the Sherpas putting them in the spotlight, giving them the sort of full attention that they deserve. Also looking at a few profiles of some of the most accomplished Sherpas, and also trying to get to know Lobsang a little bit better. What's interesting with Lobsang is he hero worshipped Scott Fisher to the extent that he started imitating him. He also wore his hair in a ponytail, for example. And vice versa. Scott Fisher, I think, thought that he was going to take Lobsang under his wing. He was only 23 years old, Lobsang, and he was going to turn Lobsang into like a legend. Lobsang was going to be his ticket to greatness, right? I'll tell you a little bit more about that side of things just a little bit later. But anyway, those who have read the Neverest series 1, 2, and 3, I actually always meant to bring the fourth book out around about this time, and so now I'm doing it. So in terms of Hall's second mistake, I think the mistake itself, besides not setting up the ropes, was that somehow he didn't know or predict Ang Dorje's relationship with Lobsang. Somehow he didn't see that coming. And I think it's a bit unfair to say something like that he was totally unaware of the resentment between the two Sherpas. I don't think that was the case. I don't think Rob Hall was like totally in the dark that these two Sherpas had a little bit of a beef with one another. But I think he underestimated it. I think he underestimated maybe the stress that all the Sherpas were under for various reasons. Ang Dorje apparently had a dream. He'd seen ghosts at Camp 3 or the previous night. He'd also gotten drunk earlier, and I think all sorts of things were weighing on them that I think the expedition leaders missed because they were distracted by worrying about their journalists. Does that make sense? So they didn't pay as much attention to the Sherpas as they would have if the journalists weren't there. And so one of those aspects was Ang Dorje's relationship with Lobsang wasn't ideal. And it came to a head on Summer Day when Ang Dorje's where he's supposed to be, but not doing anything, and everyone's sort of waiting, and eventually someone says, Ang Dorje, are you going to fix the ropes? And he said, no. Where's Lobsang? I'm not doing this without Lobsang. And so what's going on with Lobsang? And so there's a story behind that as well, why Lobsang wasn't there and what was going on there. That's also quite critical and quite important. So that to me is the second mistake, not sorting out the fixed ropes, and to some extent not anticipating that there would be a problem between the Sherpas, bearing in mind Lobsang was formerly, Rob Hall had worked with Lobsang before, so he knew him. They knew each other. Number 3 is that they didn't delegate Doug Hansen to Ang Dorje, that Rob Hall didn't delegate Doug to Ang Dorje, and arguably this is the number one mistake. If the journalist there was, if you say, well, forget about that, then arguably this is the number one mistake. I just want to go back to number 2 and just say, in Everest, in the movie, they dramatize the scene where they're in the tents, both teams, both leaders anyway, and some of the Sherpas. And Fisher and Hall are saying, okay, we've decided to work together. We've decided to merge our teams on Summit Day. This is for the benefit of the Sherpas. And you guys are going to be fixing the ropes. And it's not, there are no subtitles there, as far as I know. You can't see what they're saying. But I don't know if it's Sherpalese or in their language, there seems to be kind of sharp, kind of intense language between them. And they've actually got to intervene and say, hey, guys, we're going to be working together. So it seems like they are bickering or arguing about something, and that's dramatized in Everest. So it's not like a rumor, it's something that was definitely a factor. And they knew about it at base camp. They knew that these guides were not kosher, things weren't good. And what needed to happen was to follow up. And I think what is perhaps a little bit unknown is what happened at Camp 4. Did Rob Hall talk to his Sherpa? Did Scott Fisher talk to his Sherpa? Did the Sherpas talk to each other? Was there lack of communication? Was there someone just disobeying, just not listening? And I do think Lobsang was 23 years old. I think you got to add a little aspect that he didn't always follow orders. He was someone who was quite independent spirited, if that's the word. So Christine says it was the perfect storm. Sadly, so many people died because of too many mistakes. It's partly because there were too many cooks in the kitchen. Not necessarily. If the cooks in the kitchen had sort of agreed to work together, and just that would have been fine. Now, Stephanie, if you think about it, Ang Dorje is at the top. He's available. He doesn't want to work without Lobsang, but theoretically he could have worked with anybody else. He could have worked with John Krakauer. He could have worked with Anatoly. He could have worked with Neil Beidelman. But probably the reason why he didn't would be, well, it's unfair. I'm a Sherpa. Why am I doing this and the other Sherpa dude's not? That's just not fair. But they could maybe have said, okay, well, we'll pay you or something. Laura Thompson, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for that. So, yeah, Stephanie says Ang should have. Yeah, he definitely should have. It was kind of his responsibility and a very important responsibility, but it just shows you he was kind of up to here, right? But it also shows to me the other side of the Sherpas, and it's a little bit of a thorny area because I think the Sherpas deserve so much credit. The Sherpas deserve they risk their lives, they work so hard, they're so deserving of support and acknowledgement. But this is a rare instance where it was a Sherpa's really important responsibility to do something, and he kind of didn't, which put everybody in a bad position. Now, I'm not saying this is all Ang Dorje's fault. I'm just saying Ang Dorje was there, and you can kind of say that him resisting maybe was a bit sort of petulant. It was a little bit like, well, on the other hand, it is totally understandable because he was supposed to work with someone else, and what's he now supposed to do? Do it by himself. So, that's the issue. Stacey said, how many people died? It depends where you put the cutoff. It's either 13 or 15. Lobsang actually died in September, also climbing Everest. So he died in avalanche shortly after that. So I think around about 15 people died in 1996, but a lot of people died on May 10th. But there was a lot of death in that season, early on, in the middle of it, and at the end of it. It was just a very unusually deadly year. So just to put that in perspective, in this season, I think 4 people have died, 2 Sherpas and 2 clients. So it's almost 4 times that amount in 1996. Thanks for your Everest coverage. It's a lifelong passion and I can't get enough. Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, so number 3 is of Rob Hall's crucial mistakes. He didn't delegate Doug Hansen to Ang Dorje. Now, I want to put you guys into perspective here. At that point, so bear in mind there's a point where Rob Hall is on the summit and Scott Fischer's on the summit. And it's dramatized in Everest where Scott Fischer says to Hall, basically, I beat you. I got all my clients to the summit. All the people from Camp 4, I've gotten to the summit. All his clients. In other words, 100% success rate. Whereas Rob Hall had a very poor success rate that day. He had Kosciuszko falling out, Beck Weathers giving up, Frank Fishbeck, John Task, those 4 out of the equation. And so he's got 2 people left, and Yasuka Number gets to the top. she becomes the oldest person in history at the time, oldest woman in history to summit. And so that's a world record that he's got. He's got his own world record, which is, him being a Westerner, having the most summits at that point. And then he's just thinking, I only got one client to the summit. Can I just get one more? And but Doug Hansen is just taking so long. And so he's almost there, and he was almost there the previous year. And so what do you think is pushing Rob Hall to break his own rule? What do you think is pushing him to break this rule of, the turnaround is 2:00? Well, it's a couple of things. Scott Fisher's totally outperformed him. He's at like 100% success rate. He's got a much lower, he's gotten so far 1 out of 6 to the summit, right? And now he wants to make absolutely sure he can get at least one other person. It's almost like he's trying to minimize his loss. And I think part of that is he wants to tell a good story. If you can get Doug Hansen to the top, it's a story, this feel-good story about this postman who mortgaged himself to the hilt, who just never gave up, and who's climbing for the children. And I think another aspect to the climbing for the children thing is, in a way, he was as well. In a way, I think Rob Hall himself. So through Doug Hansen, Doug Hansen did a lot of little school children that are watching him, that have also maybe given him some money, and he's going to put their flag on the summit, and he's going to take a photo with their little banner for them. And I think part of that is awakening in Rob Hall, this idea that, well, his wife has got a child, isn't he going to climb for her? So you have this mutual thing of, well, we're doing it for the children. In addition to the whole competitive thing with Scott Fisher, and in addition to the journalist on board thing. Now, what's Krakauer going to write? And if I don't get Doug Hansen up here, what is Krakauer going to write? Isn't he going to write that Scott Fisher did a great job? We got, my team got one client up. So he wants a good story. That's what he wants. And he feels like, I need to put in some effort now to get this good story. It comes back to the original thing. Poaching Krakauer, now that decision's coming back to haunt him. Now I need to break my rules so that I can give Krakauer a good story. There's something else I just want to talk about here. About he didn't delegate the decision to Ang Dorje. So two Sherpas actually offered. Two Sherpas said to him, Rob, we'll take him to the top. We'll do it. And he said something like, I don't want to leave clients behind, right? And I think that was also playing on his mind. There'd been some grumbling from clients that they weren't getting enough attention. One thing that I've noticed in Lukas Schuska's book, I sort of was just going through it again recently. He was a very unhappy client. He says something in his book where he talks about he didn't have a single moment of joy since March, meaning the entire trip had been really miserable for him. You also get the sense that he doesn't talk to anybody. Like he talks about, we passed Ed Vestiers of the IMAX expedition, but there's no sign that he said anything to them, that he encountered Scott Fisher, but he didn't say anything to him. Also that I think he says in 6 weeks, this was the first time we actually even saw the Mountain Madness guys. And it's like, so I suppose it's possible, but, they could also have made a bit of an effort to socialize a little bit, certain clients. I think other people, probably like John Krakauer, probably had met others and spoken to others and so on. So it was a personal thing. But you really get the impression from Lukas Schuska that he was critical of a lot of what was happening. He just wasn't happy and kind of wanted to get it over with and go home. And I'm not totally like, that's not an alien concept. Mountain climbing can be miserable, but you also wonder, was this particular guy an ideal candidate to have as a teammate? If you think about it like that. The other thing that I think is fascinating is in the Everest document, in the Everest film, which actually feels a bit like a documentary because it's so, a lot of it is true. I would say easily 90% or more is factual. And the dramatizations that aren't factual feel credible. But I think a really powerful moment in that movie, which is handled sensitively and I think accurately, is the moment where Doug Hansen, Rob Hall has gone down from the summit. He spends an hour on the summit waiting for Doug Hansen. There's another hour wasted. If he just not spent that hour, he would have gotten himself down safely, and been able to help other people. But here he is spending an hour waiting on the summit, getting cold, using up oxygen, waiting for Doug Hansen. Doug Hansen's just not making it. In the end, he goes down from the summit because Doug Hansen's taking so long, and eventually gets to Doug and basically wants to tell him to turn around. The whole thing is, okay, I'm going to turn Doug around. We're not going to go to the summit. It's past the time. And instead what happens, Doug Hansen pushes it, insists, no, I'm not going to turn around. It's just there. And it's in that scenario where Rob Hall is, how can I put it, where sentiment wins through, unfortunately, where common sense, where he knows this is the rule, this is what I've done, this is what he's known for. He's known for actually turning around before the summit, right? Where he breaks his own rule. And I think it was in his obituary that appeared in The Independent. They said, perhaps Hall for once allowed a client's ambition to override his own judgment, but that remains conjecture. I don't think it's conjecture. It absolutely was his client's ambition, but I think it was also his ambition. It was his ambition, it was Scott Fisher's ambition, it was the journalist's ambition, all of that in a cocktail that became hubris. It all becomes the ambition of everyone separately added together, and now it's almost like, I don't have a choice, I've got to do this. And so he does it, and he almost immediately pays the price, because almost immediately once Doug Hansen got to the summit, he collapsed. It was like, that's the finish line. So Doug Hansen was like, I've got to get to the summit. And then when he got there, then he couldn't really do anything more. And it was almost like he expected Rob Hall to carry him down the mountain, and he couldn't. You can't really carry someone down the Hillary step, for example, which is right there near the top. And I think Helen Wilton in the PBS documentary Storm Over Everest said, I don't believe you can like belay a person down the Hillary step, let alone in a storm, and let alone at night. So, and that's the position he basically put himself in, is where he didn't turn Doug Hansen around. That little piece where they climbed to the summit was the piece where they should have climbed down and gotten over the Hillary step. And I think what happened was the storm hit them, Rob Hall and Doug Hansen, on the top of the Hillary step. And there's this dramatic moment in the movie where they can't hear one another. And Helen Wilton is saying, okay, I just want to confirm you are with Doug at the bottom of the Hillary step. And then, he's like quite exhausted and he says, at the top of the Hillary step. And when she hears that, it's like, you're not going to survive this. This is the worst case scenario almost. This is it. And but I think an even more powerful moment was the moment where Doug and Rob come together before the summit, and Rob comes in. He's basically, no, my friend, it's over. No, no, no. And he's quite adamant, as you'd expect him to be. That's why I say it's dramatized so well. He's so certain and determined. No, it's over. He's not going to take any dissent. And then Doug Hansen says, I can do it. And he just is insisting. And this is my point that I raised earlier, is summit fever is a very real thing. Summit fever is like, you can climb a certain way and you can be neither here nor there, and you can be quite miserable. But once climbers see the summit, once it's in their heart, it's like within reach. Once that summit fever kicks in, you can't change their minds. Or put it this way, it's extremely difficult to change their minds. And I think Sherpas have banged their heads against so many walls dealing with clients who are greedy, filled with that summit fever, and they just won't listen to reason. And to some extent you can understand it, how much money they've paid, how much time they've spent. But at that point, I'm almost at the end. I'm almost there, except almost could still be another hour, which is exactly what happened with Rob Hall. And then, but they just refuse to. And what do you do when someone refuses to turn around? You need to go, like Beck Weathers, you need to go down. No, I'm not going down. And even a long time later, he said, I didn't want it to be over. I didn't want my day to be over. Of course it was over. What are you doing sitting around in the death zone with snow falling on you? In any event, so I don't think Doug Hansen was the only one with summit fever. I think Rob Hall had the biggest dose of it he'd ever had, partly because of Scott Fisher. Again, if Scott Fisher had said, look, Jeepers, I'm not feeling too well, I don't need to summit, that probably would have relieved pressure on Rob Hall. If Sandy Hill Pittman had said, well, I'm really struggling today, if I'm not going to be short roped, I'm not going to make it, and I probably shouldn't be short roped. This Sherpa needs to be at the top fixing rope, so I'm also gonna turn around. And yet you did have that, because you had certain clients giving up, like Kashishka, Task, and I think Frank Fishbeck. I think they gave up at the South Summit, which is pretty high, but based on waiting there for a really, really long time and then making the decision that we're going to get too cold, we've run out of time, and we're not going to have enough oxygen. I don't know if they were wrong in that decision. Snorky Lou also asked a question last week about how many oxygen canisters were there, which I think is an excellent question. In the Everest film, I think somebody says, will you put 4 there from the one expedition? So I think a Sherpa put 4, if that's correct, put 4 oxygen tanks at the South Summit. And then I think I read somewhere else, I can't quite remember where I saw this, but I just remember making a mental note. I think the other expedition took 8. So I don't know if there were supposed to be 12, and I don't know if that's sufficient, but that's the impression I get. Let's just see who's here. Victoria, you've been away for long. You've really been away a long time. Christine says, when Leen Gammelgaard came back to Denmark, she's treated like a hero. I quite like Leen Gammelgaard, but she also gave Scott Fisher a little bit of a hard time, kind of saying, I want to climb without oxygen. Nothing heroic, but about voluntarily climbing up a mountain with a guide and where Sherpas carry your gear. Climbers have left a mess up there. That's true. Test your mettle by going through childbirth. Yeah, no, there are different ways of being a hero, that's for sure. So let's just go through them again. crucial mistake number one, poaching Krakauer. Number two, they didn't set the fixed ropes at the summit, the Sherpas. And part of that being leaving it till summit day and also not being able to predict Eng Dorje's relationship with Lobsang. So basically just the fixed ropes. Number three, he didn't delegate Doug Hansen to Eng Dorje, or he didn't turn him around, one of the two. I think the other side of if he'd delegated Doug Hansen to Eng Dorje would have been like Doug probably wouldn't have spent as much time on the summit taking photos and everything. You've also got to wonder, did Rob Hall not delegate that because of what Eng Dorje had just done? Meaning Eng Dorje was derelict in his duty in the sense of fixing the ropes, because of a bit of a bone to pick with Lobsang, but now can you rely on him to take your client to the summit? And you could argue that if he had done that, wouldn't Doug have lost his life, and then wouldn't Rob Hall have blamed Eng Dorje? You get what I'm saying? On the other hand, who knows, maybe Eng Dorje would have succeeded. I doubt it. The only way that he could have or would have is if it happened very quickly. Another side to it is that it was going to be two Sherpas, with Doug Hansen, and maybe that would have been the difference getting him from the top of the Hillary step to the bottom. And also there would have just have been more manpower. Rob Hall, if he'd heard that there were problems, he himself could have gone back, and then there would have been three people helping Doug Hansen. And then if he got into trouble, they could have all helped each other. It's difficult to predict, but it didn't happen. So that's number three. The number four is that he violated his own turnaround time. And some people would put that at number one. Just say, this is mountain climbing 101. This is climbing Everest 101. You don't violate your turnaround time. You've got one rule, and it's quite simple. At that time, you turn around no matter what. And Rob Hall had done that in the past, and Yeri didn't. And so when you say, why didn't he? I think it's quite simple. It's because there were stories that were going to be told, and there's an incentive to pushing the limit. And what was literally happening was, if you think about fates and the gods, it was literally, Rob, just do what you've always done. Stick to your strict deadlines. Do what you've always done. Last year you turned Doug around. Do it this year. Just Rob, be Rob. And that year he didn't. And it's quite simple why, because he wanted a good story. And so he's willing to push the limit, push the boundary. And he shouldn't have done that. And so it was literally at that marginal point where if you just did what you needed to do, everything would have been fine. So what does he do? He pushes. And so the mountain gods basically say, sorry, you've crossed that line now. Now it's too late to come back. Now you've reached that point of no return. Certainly for one of you, and then I don't think he could forgive himself for his decision. I think he felt like, I can't leave Doug here. I took responsibility. Think about that as this weird irony. Doug convinces him to take him, and then when he takes him and gets them both into trouble, he takes responsibility and says, I shouldn't have done that. I'm not going to leave you. And then they both die. Victoria, thank you, Nick, for this incredible coverage of a fascinating topic. Sorry for not being present. Life was a bit crazy. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're back, and I hope we're going to see you around, but it's good that you're here. Thanks for that. Snorky Lou, I think Rob lost Doug while trying to go down the Hillary step. Doug was last seen there. Rob was found lower at the South Summit. I guess he tried to get down to Camp 4 after losing Doug. Yeah, well, I think there may be a little bit of, Rob may have had a little bit of edema. I think he'd had edema before on K2 with a guy called Ball, who was his former partner. So I think it was first called Hall and Ball Adventure Consultants, and then when Ball died, it just became Adventure Consultants. But in that climb, Ball got edema, Rob Hall got edema, Ball needed to be rescued actually by Scott Fisher. Hall kind of recovered on the way down, and then he recovered, but he got edema in that occasion. It's possible that he had some kind of edema in this case, given how long he was up there, given that he ran out of oxygen, given the exposure, just given the fact that he'd sort of had it before. I think it's possible. I'm not saying he died of edema. I'm saying that edema may have been a factor and it may have compromised his thinking to some extent. And I don't mean like immediately. I mean, spending such a long time on the summit may have eventually hurt him, right? You know, he may have just gotten complacent. He climbed Everest, I think at that point 5 times. And so he may have just assumed that he's fine, that is invincible. But his decision with Doug was not in character in a way. But I agree with you. I think he lost Doug, or certainly in the Hillary Step area. I don't know whether he lost him getting him down the Hillary Step or in the initial part of the traverse. I think the movie dramatizes him as getting him down and saying to Doug, I'm going to go and get us oxygen, stay here. And Doug doesn't kind of hear him. And then Doug sort of, he expects Doug to be quite passive and quite immobile. So when he leaves Doug, he expects Doug to just stay put. But while he's moving away across that traverse section, Doug rouses and sort of tries to go after Rob. Rob doesn't know about it, doesn't know that Doug is sort of following him. And then when he looks back, Doug has misapplied his harness. You know, you actually see him trying to find the rope, missing it, and then the wind blowing him off. So I was quite angry, even though I've written about this and even though I've studied it and even though I've watched the movie before. That part just makes me so angry, just because it was so unnecessary. But, you know, we all do make mistakes. We all can make stupid mistakes. It's just so, it's maddening that within a very short time of making that elementary mistake, one guy's dead and then the other guy will die as well. A horrible, long, horrible, agonizing death. And not only that, Rob Hall asked for help, and his one guide, Andy Harris, who's on his way down, who probably would have been safe and okay, hears the message and then turns around to go and render assistance. And of course it's you know, it's that's going to end unhappily ever after, because the people he's going to rescue are beyond rescuing. But he's also such a conscientious guy that he responds. And the other thing that is so heartbreaking with that is Ang Dorje and the other Sherpa are right in front of Andy Harris in the dramatization. And he's like calling out to them, hey, you know, Rob needs your help, but they don't hear him. And so he takes it upon himself to do it. Now, I don't know, that's also an interesting area. Did the Sherpas really not hear him? Couldn't he use the radios? I think that the radios is an unspoken part of this whole tragedy. Is if the communication was better, then everything could have been sorted out, like the fixed ropes. And the communication would have been better if the radios were better. And it seems to me, and it seems to be that the radios on both teams were quite dodgy, just because like the technology wasn't that great. And sometimes when they were on the other side of the summit, the South Summit, if someone was above it and someone was below it, the transmission just didn't get through, which caused delays, because if you've got a leader that's on the wrong side of it, and he needs to be the policeman, but he can't get his orders through, then there's a delay, then there's a problem. Laura says once high altitude cerebral edema sets in, decision making becomes extremely difficult. Just at the time you need most of your wits about you. Absolutely. So, what Laura is saying there is, I think Neil Beidelman was saying you have the kind of capacity of a fifth grader. You're thinking almost like a child in very basic ways, because you're compromised. And the very difficult thing with edema is it's so easy to just sort of confuse with, to some extent, hypoxia, and to some extent, hypothermia, right? So in other words, edema has got very similar symptoms. Swelling on the brain has got very similar symptoms to the fogginess of just not having enough oxygen. You know what I mean? It's easy to just think, well, I'm just not. I'm tired. I'm sleep deprived, and confuse that with the more serious alternative. And I was actually going to talk in this episode about a South African climber who went through that exact thing. That was originally going to be what I was going to talk about. I might do that next week. Depends on how much interest there is in this. So something else I want to say is I've experienced, I think it's hypothermia. Hypo is when you get cold. Hyper with an E is when you overheat. So I've experienced hypothermia, but not on a mountain. I've experienced it swimming, where the octopus teacher was filmed, in that general area and in that kind of water. And now you obviously see the guy in that movie swimming without a wetsuit. He does have like something on his head. Well, I did a mile swim. I think it's a mile out and a mile back or something like that. In that water, I think it's usually 11 degrees. I think that day it was like 9 degrees. And I was stupid. I didn't have breakfast, so I didn't have fuel to fire my metabolism. So in other words, my body quickly burned up its own reserves, and then had an energy shortage to make things even worse. So besides not eating, I didn't have a cap. I didn't have a swimming cap. So I was literally swimming in this extremely cold water with nothing keeping the heat in my head, which is the most important part, and swimming in a Speedo. And so I must have been in this 9-degree water easily for an hour, and there'd just been a big storm. So there was a lot of foam, which you inhaled the saline thing. The bottom line being, I'm a pretty strong swimmer. I swam for my state. I've got a swimming background, and I just felt like I can't do this. I'm done. I'm done. So I kind of got to the summit of my swim. I got to the halfway mark, and now it's just time to get back. And sort of maybe a third of the way back, the cold just started eating into me, and I was really thin at that point. I think I weighed 67. I've got a photo of me from that day, but just muscle and absolutely no fat. I was a triathlete at that time, and I was just the cold had eaten into me, and then I just realized, well, I actually can't do this. I'm exhausted. I can't do this. And I started waving for help, like what you see in Baywatch. But the beach was like this thin yellow line, and the people in it were like little dots. That's how far I was from shore. And then it just occurred to me, in this dimness of my mind, bear in mind, I'm starting to short circuit. My body's shutting down, but my mind's also slowing down. And so I'm now waving for help, and in the dimness of my mind, I was thinking, there's no way, even if they start coming towards me, if they like, on your marks, get set, go, and they race towards me, I'm not gonna, Snorky, I'm 177. So my body fat was like 5 or 6%. It was world class in that sense, but extremely low. So, but virtually no body fat. anyway, and I just realized if they come out to me, I'm not going to be able to paddle water and kind of survive this cold, waiting to be rescued. I'm not going to be able to just wait here for someone to come and save me. And that was a fortunate decision because I don't think they even saw me. Even though there were people watching all of us swimming out to Barker Rock, I don't think they realized, well, there's actually another swimmer all the way out there. And so then I just made this decision. I kind of actually sank through the water at one point. I sank down. So I'm like literally under the water, easily with half a meter of water above my head, sinking down. And part of me did think, I remember that moment really clearly, part of me did think it would be so easy just to sleep. And then I would have probably died. I probably would have continued sinking and lost consciousness and died. And that would have been it. In any event, so I'm sinking down, thinking, wow, I feel like I could just sleep. And then I brought myself back to the surface. And then I just made like this really primal decision to just swim. And, because I've got a swimming background, because many years actually, I would often in the winter, I would get up and at like 5 a.m, and I would swim twice a day. And part of it would be you get up at 5 a.m. and you go and you swim, but you're half asleep, but you would swim laps. And I remember even with that, sometimes feeling like, wow, did I just fall asleep in the middle of swimming training? I don't think you're sleeping, but I think you sort of, if you don't lose consciousness, you sort of go into an automatic mode. And I think that programming helped me when I was swimming back. Now, and anyway, long story short, I don't even really remember swimming back. All I remember was deciding just swim, and almost like waking up, and my fingers were scratching the bottom of the seabed or whatever, the beach bed, and there was a little bit of kelp there. And I couldn't actually stand when I got there. I reached the shore, but I couldn't like come out of the sea. I couldn't walk out. And that was when these guys ran out to do this. But what I'm trying to say is that probably happens on the mountain as well, is you're so cold that you eventually, will give yourself an instruction. And then you go into an even lower mode of like almost automatic. You're just walking or whatever, you just whatever. And you are going through a lower level of consciousness. And that's very easy, I think, to confuse with edema. But I think edema is right next to that as well. We are very grateful you have not died there. And I think that was definitely on the cards. I was actually in the newspaper after that. The lifeguards eventually saw me the moment I reached the shore, and then ran out, and 6 of them carried me into a shower cubicle. And I think, they put like this scalding water on me in the shower. And at about 5 or 10 minutes later, I started shivering a little bit. And then I shivered a little bit, and then after that, I just shook uncontrollably, and I was obviously very cold. Great work all week. So glad you made it out of that water. Yeah, no, thanks a lot. Thanks, Yvonne. So that was quite an experience. But I mean, that was also born out of stupidity. I didn't have breakfast, which is a rookie mistake. And when I went to the doctor, she said, "Jeepers, your blood glucose is very, very low." And also, I didn't have a swimming cap, and I meant to take one. I just forgot it. And then when the guy who was organizing the thing handed it out, when I got to him, he said, "Oh, I don't have any left." And so that's what happened. So rookie mistakes. What Rob Hall made was also a rookie mistake. So we all make mistakes. I'm not judging him. I'm not saying, I'm just saying it was a crucial mistake. If I had died on that swim, you could have been saying the same thing about me. You were really dumb. You should have just worn a cap or just had breakfast. Yeah, I didn't. I made a mistake, and I almost paid for it. But you don't think when you go out there that you maybe going to die. You do think, well, if things get bad, I guess I can get rescued, right? There are people around you. Why are things not going to be okay? So poaching Krakauer, not fixing the ropes, didn't delegate Doug Hansen, violated his own turnaround time. And the fifth one is he should have made sure Beck Weathers went down. Now you might think, I don't see that as a critical mistake, but it is, because that probably cost Yasuka Namba her life. And also, if he put his foot down the way that he normally did, if he was playing policeman, and there's actual footage of this. This is not dramatizing Everest. This is actual footage of Rob Hall at base camp. He says, you know what? If I don't need to be popular, if I've got to play the policeman, I'll play the policeman. That's exactly what he needed to do with Beck Weathers. He needed to say to Beck Weathers, okay, Beck Weathers said, I'm having a bit of a problem with my eyesight. Okay. Well, then you need to go down. Your day's done. You need to go down. You could argue that, well, because he had a problem with his eyesight, he would need to be short roped. But then he needed to follow up. He needed to make sure that Beck did go down. Do you follow what I'm saying? He needed to, if Beck couldn't go down because of his eyesight, Beck needed to go down at the first possible moment. And he probably needed to follow that up. That's quite a harder thing to sort of do, because was there a problem with the radios, or who's going to do that? But I mean, I think a good example is when Kosciuszko, Fishbeck, and Task passed Rob. Rob could have said to them, you know what, Lou, if you come across Beck, but he probably didn't anticipate that Beck was just sitting out there the whole time. Anyway, if you come across Beck, make sure you take him down, right? In other words, followed up. It wouldn't have been hard to do that. 3 of his own clients are going back down. One's already given up. Take Beck with you. Tell Beck, from me, you've got to go down. But the reason that didn't happen was because none of them could short rope. And so it kind of shows you Beck was already in quite a bad way, where he felt he needed to be short roped early on. And so Beck Weathers was almost the equivalent of Sandy Hill Pittman, in the sense that he probably shouldn't have been going up on Summit Day. You know what I mean? He probably shouldn't have. I don't know how a doctor couldn't have anticipated his own eye problems, because I don't believe it just happened like that. I don't believe it's possible, but I don't believe it just happened like that. The other thing is he was climbing out of the dark. So how could you have snow blindness when you're coming out of darkness? I don't know. Maybe it was from the previous day and he didn't realize it, because, I don't know, it just doesn't seem likely. I don't know. I'm just saying, not making sure Beck went down, then it had a second, a follow-up with Doug Hansen, where Doug Hansen also told him kind of what to do. So, in the movie, it's dramatized him saying, you must go down, and Beck kind of almost not shouting at him, but raising his voice saying, I don't want to go down. And then he didn't. And there one or two occasions where Beck sort of puts Rob Hall in his place, and maybe Rob Hall with Doug Hansen sort of felt, maybe I need to give these guys a break. Maybe I need to let them have their way. But if Beck hadn't sort of argued with him, possibly Rob would have felt more confident, more strong, more secure, more certain in being assertive with Doug. Does that make sense? So that's why I put, he should have made sure Beck Weathers went down as number 5. You can look at it another way and say, you know what, it was a difficult situation because Beck couldn't see. But think about it in another way. Rob Hall is a hand holder, and he's got a client early on who's struggling, who's not going to make the summit. Rob Hall should have done something there, either taken one of his Sherpas and, okay, you're going to take Beck down, or take him down himself. I mean, big bummer at that point, but it needed to be done. And in the end, Beck Weathers complicated everything subsequent to that and could have made it even worse. Like if they had, in a way, if they had rescued Beck Weathers, they voted not to, but if they had, it could have made things worse in the sense of, we argue and we say they should have gone out to save Beck Weathers and Yasuka. But what if someone did and then they died? You can also play it that way. I'm just saying, in the middle of the night, while they were listening to the radios and listen, what on earth is going to happen to Rob Hall, listening to all of this happening, listening to the expedition saying, how are we going to get Scott back? Beck and Yasuka were out there. But if they had gone out there, what if something had happened? What if they'd gotten lost or So Beck created a huge, he aggravated a bad situation. Left for dead, yeah. I wonder how Rob envisaged Beck's rescue. What was his plan? I think it depends on what was really happening. It depends on Beck's actual eyesight, his actual problem. Ultimately, Beck rescues himself and gets himself into camp. So if you think about, could Beck not go with other climbers down to Camp 4, and the fact that he walked himself from the South Col into Camp 4, what's the difference? If Beck can navigate by himself to Camp 4, why couldn't he have gone with other climbers when he was in a much better condition and he's with them? And there are also other things. He could also have said to Krakauer, can you take Beck down? That's something else he could have said. He could have delegated. But probably, how's that going to look? Me asking my journalist to do kind of my dirty work or the dog's body work kind of thing. At the foot of Everest, is your breathing already compromised by the altitude? So at the foot of Everest, you are around about, I think about just under 6 kilometers above sea level. So to give you an idea, the foot of Everest, which is base camp, I guess, is as high as Kilimanjaro. So Kilimanjaro is 2/3 the height of Everest. And I can tell you, when I was there, when I was on the summit of Kilimanjaro, I had a splitting headache. You struggle to breathe. I had stomach problems. My digestion wasn't so great. And so that's already setting in at sort of base camp level. That's why you need a long time to acclimatize. You need really a long time. But during this long time that you're acclimatizing, you can get sick, right? Meaning a cough, a cold. You can get what they call the deli belly, where you sort of pick up what do they call it? A stomach bug. And that can severely compromise you. And it looks like Scott may have gotten that. In fact, that's mentioned in Everest. It's mentioned where Rob Hall kind of comes to the tent to have a word with him, and then Scott sort of gets up kind of gingerly, sort of like, and then Rob kind of jokes and chuckles and says, "Oh, a touch of, is something wrong? You seem to be getting up quite with difficulty. And then I think he says something about, I've got a touch of the deli belly. And quite a few people did get sick. Tim Matson and Charlotte Fox were sick. There were others that struggled with sleeping because the air was so thin. Pete Schooning was one of them. So there were problems. There were definitely quite a few problems. He told Beck to. Beck said he promised and crossed his heart. I don't know if that I promise and cross my heart. That's not dramatized in the movie. It seems like a Beckish thing to say. It sounds cool. I don't know. So I've mentioned these 5 crucial mistakes. I don't know if you've got other ideas, but I think there are other aspects to deal with as well. I'm not going to take it further, but I think the radios were a serious problem undermining everything on both expeditions, unfortunately. We know that they ended up borrowing radios. I'm talking about they wanted to borrow a radio from the South African team. They were also using Guy Cotter on Pumori because, in order to kind of relay a signal and to relay messages, because they couldn't get proper, direct communication. There was also a problem with oxygen where, you don't really want a situation where climbers are saying, okay, I'm not going to go for the summit because I think I'm going to run out of oxygen. You don't want that situation. You either want enough oxygen reserves or you want your time or your scheduling to be right, or both. But you don't want a guy to say, well, the summit's just there. I think I'm going to run out of oxygen. I'm out of here. And that is kind of what happened. And I do get the sense, I don't know if it was both expeditions, but I do get the sense that lower on the slopes, some of the older clients had used up a substantial amount of oxygen when usually no one would, meaning you're at camp 2 or you're at base camp and you're sleeping on oxygen. And so how many tanks are you using per night at base camp where no one typically uses it? And the only way you can sleep is using this up. So you can imagine how much is being used up. And that then makes the margin less and less for everybody else, kind of thing. Teresa says, I couldn't imagine how those Sherpas work hard, packing up all the time. Sherpas work hard, they do. Apparently Lopsang was lugging 80 pounds up to Camp 4. Let me just check how much that is in kilograms. Is it 80 pounds in kilograms? 36 kilograms. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but carrying 36 kilograms when you're climbing a vertical ice surface like the Lhotse face is pretty heavy. It's definitely not easy. And it's day after day after day. Sarah Hill Pittman said something quite interesting. I can't remember where I read it. Or no, I think it was Lukas Schuschke said, when you climb Everest, most of the climb is Lhotse, meaning when you're climbing Mount Everest, you climb something like 80% of the climb, you're climbing Lhotse, which is I think the world's 4th highest mountain. So I think the mountain right next to Everest is also one of the world's highest mountains. But so when you're climbing the Lhotse face, you're actually climbing Lhotse, and only at the very end you climb Everest sort of proper, where Everest stands alone as the sort of peak. It's 36 kilograms, Christine. I'm dreading carrying around my fanny pack on vacation. That's pretty funny. Okay. So the radios were a problem, oxygen supply was a problem, stuff that, you are going to, like if you say that's a crucial mistake you made, it's very hard to avoid in a way. I mean, the radios may be something they could have done something about, but the oxygen, you've ordered the amount, you can't really change that very much. And maybe that's why the decision was to merge, was if you merge, you're also merging your oxygen to some extent. And so if a climber falls out of the equation, well, now there's oxygen for that climber. So for example, Robble would have known Beck Weathers didn't make it to the summit, so I can get Beck's oxygen, or Doug can get Beck's oxygen, so there's extra oxygen in that sense. But also if there's another climber from another expedition. I think another dimension that's also interesting is there was another climber reaching the summit when Doug was trying to reach it, and that was Makalu Gore. And that may also have given Rob a sense of, well, it's still happening, it's still on, right? Then another area that I think is easy to say in hindsight, but I think the team selection of adventure consultants was possibly not ideal. I don't know if they chose the best clients. I think you've also got to decide which clients you want. I think you sometimes got to turn away a client that is going to be a piece of work, and also a client that's too old or whatever, and that may have been a problem. What's also interesting with adventure consultants is if they'd gotten all their clients up that day, it would have been a new world record, meaning it would have been the most clients on a day guided up to the top of Everest. So that is, I think, one of the records that Rob Hall was thinking about. Okay, so we finished with the 5 crucial mistakes part. I'm going to quickly take you through 2 other things that are kind of a bonus. So I think you've got to be practical in a way and say, as a result of the journalists going along, or what was the result of these journalists going along in terms of the long term, right? Broadly speaking, globally speaking, so these journalists went, what happened over the long term? And I think there are 2 ways to look at that. The one way is to say, what was the arc of the adventure consultants business as a result of having Krakauer part of that expedition? And then important to juxtapose that, to compare that and say, what was the arc of Mountain Madness, Scott Fisher's expedition? How did that business develop given what happened in 96, given that Sandy Hill Pittman was their journalist? So what is the result of that competition, right? So the 2 guiding companies respectively, but then also the journalists respectively. How did Krakauer's life go from that point onwards? And how did Pittman's life go from that point onwards? And I realize this is a bit of a oversimplification, to put it mildly. I realize this is being very superficial, but I also think there is some value in it. And one way that you can measure it, the trajectory of these people and these companies subsequent to the disaster, is to literally go onto Instagram and to look at their followers, to say, okay, so which one is more popular or credible, or whatever you want to say, which one has developed greater influence since that time, right? And if you look at what do you think? Do you think adventure consultants did better? So they had a better success story. They got a lot of their clients, all their clients, to the top, lost their leader, but so did adventure consultants. But they had Sandy Hill Pittman as their kind of, supposedly as their spokesperson. Do you know what I'm saying? And so who do you think won in that score? Which guiding company? As I say, I realize it's quite a blunt tool. It's quite a crude way of doing this. and maybe even quite a insensitive way of doing it. But if you go to Adventure Consultants on Instagram, so it's the guiding company of Rob Hall, they've got 22,700 followers, and they say official page of Expedition Mountain Guiding Company from New Zealand, Everest 8,000 meter peaks, Himalayan climbing, trekking, polar travel, 22,700 followers. Mountain Madness is less. Just trying to see if I can find them here. Mountain Madness, 14,500. So kind of 2/3. And it says Mountain Madness provides the highest quality climbing instruction and has been guiding mountaineering since 1984. So also what's quite interesting is what Adventure Consultants says. I think in their last post, or one of the last posts that I read, I think it's the second last post, they say they're shutting down for the season. So I don't think they even went to Everest this year due to coronavirus. So credit to them that they actually were risk averse, and they took precautions, and they didn't take risks this year by going to Nepal. Nepal's got incredible infection figures, as does India. I think that was the right call from them. But one thing that is interesting is when you look at, you can do this on Wikipedia, if you go and look at the list of deaths on Everest, Adventure Consultants comes up constantly, but with a lot of Sherpa deaths. I don't think they've suffered a client death since Doug Hansen and Yasuka Number, but they have had a lot of Sherpas dying since then. If you go through that list of deaths, it's Adventure Consultants comes up a lot. As I said, not clients though, which I think is quite interesting. So the other aspect I think to note is the journalists. How did the journalists do subsequently? Now, bear in mind, Krakauer was on Adventure Consultants. Adventure Consultants has won the influencing battle, won the popularity battle since 1996. Was that due to Krakauer being on his team? I think that may be part of it. But what do you think is the difference between Krakauer's influence on Instagram and Sandy Hill Pittman? So Krakauer has, I think, 108,000 followers. That's pretty substantial. And he describes himself now as Krakauer not writing, which I think is, it's quite interesting because I actually feel the same way. I have also this year chosen to not write, and me writing, what I'm doing now is kind of more just a way of getting through. I'm on the wrong side of a sleep cycle, so I might as well just write to get the night to pass, kind of thing. I'd already started work on Everest 4, but I'm kind of just trying to roll the hours by, because when I write, time just flies. That's kind of my way of doing it. So I should be on my Instagram, I should also be Nick not writing, but writing now. But anyway, he's got 108,000 followers. That's really not bad, given he's just got 95 posts up there. He describes himself as, I write books for a living, but he's been toiling in the writing factory for more than 40 years. Not writing is way more fun. And so that's how he describes himself. No mention of Everest, although, in his bio, although the last post that I saw is a picture of Doug Hansen's, I think, gravestone. And then Sandy Hill Pittman has got just a touch over 7,000 followers. So let's just repeat. Krakauer, 108,000, and Sandy Hill less than, just a little bit more than 7,000. and she's got 748 posts, and she describes herself as an adventurer, as an athlete, as an author. She's one of the few people that didn't write a book on the 96 disaster, even though she had a publishing deal. She describes herself as a traveler, mostly to mountains, a competitor in the 2015 CrossFit Games. No mention of Everest. No mention of, climbed Everest. It's just not there. And you might be surprised, but Krakauer also has a second page, which he says is dedicated to comparing and contrasting my memoir about the 96 disaster with the 2015 film Everest. So he's actually gone to the trouble to fact check the movie, where he wants to specifically sort of tell people, this is what I said, and that's what the movie says, and and he's got 406 followers on that, so not terribly popular, that particular page. And then I guess one can also bring up Beck Weathers. I don't know if he's got another profile, but his number one thing is survived Mount Everest 1996. That's his number one thing. And then he says he graduated from Midwestern State University, raised in Japan, currently living in Dallas. And then there's a link to a Kepler speakers thing. So he obviously makes money, what do you call it, giving, I guess, motivational speeches or whatever. I don't know whether he's still a doctor. I mean, he doesn't say on that he works, but I don't know how you could do that if you can't use your hands. I don't know if you could do the work that he was doing if you can't, and so he's got 57 followers on that particular page. And I mean, he stresses as his number one thing, survived Mount Everest 1996. Bear in mind, not summit Mount Everest, survived Mount Everest. And that's my story. I don't really have too much more to say on that. Timmy, did you hear me say that's my story? It's all about the end. Hey, Timmy? Timmy, do you want to go to Everest? There was actually a dog that went to Everest. I seem to remember when I was writing about it that someone was taking a dog that they'd found in a shelter or somewhere, and this dog, that whole thing became really huge. I think she wrote a book about it, or a book was written about this dog. I don't think the dog climbed Everest, but I think the dog was on Everest, maybe camp one camp here or the other. But that's, some doggy-related mountain climbing news. Thanks for your story. I wouldn't last 5 minutes. Okay. Which story? Caroline, what do you mean, which story? You mean on Everest? I agree with you, Snorky. Christine, the big announcement is basically that I'm writing a book right now. Maybe to some of you that's not a big announcement. To me, it's quite a big deal. So I am working on Everest 4, and that should be out probably in the next 10 days or so. That is an account of the 96 Everest disaster that deals with the Sherpas. It deals with their side of the story. It sort of focuses on that side. And in other words, I try and sequestrate that aspect and focus on it. It's not like I am blind to everything else and you just avoid everything else, but you just want to see it via that perspective and from that perspective. And thus far, it's really interesting. I'm actually looking forward to each time that I sort of dip into it again. I'm learning new things. I've got new questions, something that I'm trying to find out. I've actually contacted Everest Disaster author just to see if he knows the answer. When did Lobsang rejoin the expedition? Because he went to Kathmandu with his uncle, who ultimately died. When did he get back? Like, how long was he out of the picture? That would just be interesting to know the facts with that. So that's something that that I'm investigating. Yes, to answer your question, simple to make it, answers yes to that. Gillian says, delighted about the new book, your story. So I'm not going to say too much about what I'm going to say now, but just my original plan for Everest 4 was that I wanted to go to the Himalayas myself, and I wanted to hike around, do the Annapurna circuit, or hike to base camp with Kalmirit. I was actually communicating with him and get like a first-hand thing with the Sherpas kind of thing, and with the mountain, and then coronavirus happened. It was sort of originally I was going to go to America, and then as an alternative to that I thought was maybe going to be more workable, was going to the Himalayas, and then I started that, and then coronavirus happened last year. So instead of that, I'm going to be providing something else that involves adventure, to put it mildly, and it involves suffering and exhaustion and guides and leaders and expedition teammates or whatever. That didn't happen very long ago. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. But I'm going to be providing some insight into how that applies to the Sherpas and to Everest from the perspective of, I'm not going to, I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to take it too much further than that. But I'm going to provide you guys with a little bit of insight into an adventure I had that gives you a unique view into that dynamic, in terms of the relationship of the climbers to the Sherpas, that I don't think has been really acknowledged very often. I think that's going to be quite interesting. I'm quite looking forward to that part as well. Snowline says, very excited about your new book. I really enjoy hearing about mountaineering experiences on various mountains around the world. So this, what I'm talking about, does involve a mountain, but it's not climbing it on with your feet. It's going to involve mountain biking through mountains, if I can put it that way. So it's a little bit of a different take, but it's the same dynamic, dealing with how clients get along with one another, when one's weaker, when one's stronger, how the guides and the leader deal with that difference in ability, and how it actually manifests. And I think you might find that quite interesting. While we passed the 2-hour mark, I remember when I would sort of aim for the 1-hour mark in these lives. Now it's sort of passing 2 hours. So anyway, I think I've said all that needs to be said. What I've also done is I've put a little bit more effort into the book covers. I'm not terribly thrilled with the Everest book covers. They have evolved, and I'm putting up a post probably tonight on why that happened and how that happened. It's quite an interesting story. Talking about the covers of Everest 1, 2, 3. There were originally other covers, and then certain things happened. And so I've kind of addressed that through the Everest 4 cover they're going to all line up with one another. And so I'll show you what I mean, you folks that are on Patreon. Bear in mind, I am narrating the first Everest book. I'm at chapter 19 so far. So I don't know what you guys think that are following that. Stephanie, are you listening to Neverest on Patreon? Someone saying you should check out his Patreon. I do put up some documentaries that have been released over the years and coverage on Patreon. So if you want more in-depth sort of discussion and footage and just research, I guess, then that is available on Patreon. I've wanted to go into this on the 25th year anniversary, so I'm glad that there's some interest in it. Bria says, everyone go to Patreon. Yeah, Bria's on Patreon, Stephanie's on Patreon, Christine's on Patreon. Teresa, bye-bye. Thanks for listening. Lady Zaga in Toronto, looking up little tidbits. Okay. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for being here. For those interested in true crime generally, I'm covering Suzanne Morphew. I'm going to be probably putting up quite a controversial video tomorrow, maybe tonight, on sorry, I'm actually getting my cases mixed up. Sorry, that's on Laurie Vello. Was she dumb to believe what she believed? In other words, were her beliefs in God, in the cult, did that come out of stupidity? Was that dumb? Is it dumb to believe in God? And it might sound like a insensitive and simplified topic, but I think it's quite a interesting topic when you just think about it. When you think about, also extreme beliefs, where does that come from, right? Stephanie says, I love your analysis on topics others won't touch. I think there's a reason others won't touch it. It's a surefire way of losing subscribers. And I guess that's the price to pay for being the most authentic voice in true crime. Snorky Lou, I'm afraid to sign up on Patreon as I would have to quit my day job. Snorky Lou, you can sign up for Patreon for $1 a month, and you can sign up for 1 month. So, you don't really have to put out a second mortgage. Christy says, I promise when I move out of the medical facility, I will join Patreon because right now they take all my money. Again, it's just $1. The audiobook Neverest is on the $10 tier just because it's a really long audiobook. I'm already at chapter 19 and I'm about halfway. But you're right, it is quite addictive. There are a lot of people who feel like they get a break from the coronavirus through my content. They sort of just get into other stuff that keeps their minds occupied, and they get to engage with another community, quite an interesting community of people all around the world, Canada, the UK, I think there's someone from Poland, Norway, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. Lady Zag, I've been watching Everest for many years. The last docu I saw was the 2019 season. The Indian couple in their 50s. The View, okay. Stephanie says, it has helped me tremendously being on Patreon. Laura, I just mean by, I'm not saying you're stupid to believe in God, I'm just saying sometimes having a certain kind of faith can make you stupid. So for example, if you believe or insist on believing the world's going to end tomorrow, then you might do some stupid things. Do you know what I mean? So certain beliefs, not so much believing in God, but certain beliefs can make you complacent or just maladaptive. That's really the area I want to go into, which I think is if you allow yourself past the hurdle of, well, this is a touchy subject, and just say, well, I wonder what thought experiments we can have on this topic, then I think it does get quite interesting. I see what you say. Okay. Caroline says Patreon is really good. Thanks, Caroline. Gillian, great Patreon content, well worth it. Is there anyone here that's not on Patreon that is tempted? Big difference between theism and fatalism or weird apocalyptic cult stuff. Is there? I mean, isn't theism about ensuring yourself against death? I'm going to die, so I'm going to go to heaven. I think a lot of theism graduates to the Book of Revelations and that stuff, but it's debatable. Donald Duck just joined. Awesome. Barbara Henninger, I am tempted. Barbara, we need you in our community. Zenaida, me, and I will today. Great, Zenaida. I know, Zenaida, you're quite often here on YouTube. So I do kind of podcast voice recordings on Patreon, but there's quite a lot of analysis. There's also just a nice group discussing things, and there are a couple of patrons who do their own research. They provide links and they provide their own kind of background, meaning that they'll find additional information, and that makes it quite an intelligent community. So Robbie Robbins says Patreon is great, so much content. So it's not a static site. There's quite a lot happening on Patreon. There's quite a lot. It's not like one post a week or one post a month. There are a couple of posts a day. At the moment, there's one audiobook chapter of Neverest uploaded every day. Timmy, do you think it's time to say goodbye, Timmy? Time to say goodbye. I've actually got some really nice footage recently of Timmy and Ivy kind of wrestling with one another, but kind of like loving wrestling, where she sort of her paw is in his mouth, but they sort of licking one another and biting and licking and so on. So they're kind of pals, but there's a little bit of, it's almost like siblings that play. Sometimes the gets a bit rough. So I've actually got a little video of that I should actually put up. Okay, Timmy. Oh, I think my hands are smelling of doggy breath. Donald Duck tweeted you the link to the TCRS Discord. Okay, Donald Duck, we'll talk about that. I must say, what I'm missing is hearing the voices of you guys, and I've started going in that area a little bit. We've done a couple of Zooms, but it's something I want to do more, especially wanting to do a book club. And I think, a good topic for a book club, for example, would be the Everest disaster. I mean, this is quite an interesting book on the disaster that I don't know how many people have read. Just gives a different view of things, which I think is definitely quite interesting. Precious fur babies. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, guys. Victoria says, Zooms, please. Okay, so Victoria, you're going to need to participate in a Zoom, right? What do you want to talk about? A particular case or book club or the Everest disaster? Let us know. Okay. Schnauzers have such character. I have a snorky half schnauzer. She looks like a schnauzer puppy, but she's 4 years old, just 9 pounds. Doggy breath is the best. You should smell his. He's eating some cat food, and so his breath's not the best. Everest might be a good start. Okay. Victoria, have you read anything on Everest? Doping in the cycling world. That's definitely also a topic that one could cover. I don't know if you guys know, I've interviewed Lance Armstrong's former teammate. So that was also quite an interesting discussion and period when I was writing about that. Pomeranian. So for those who've stuck around till now, I think I'm going to just update you with some news. I had a conversation with my father last night. He tells me that 4 people that live very close to me have got coronavirus. One guy's wife is in hospital right now on a ventilator. So it is pretty serious. It's certainly serious in where I am in the world. Bear in mind, we heading into midwinter. We about 3 weeks away from the shortest day of the year and the longest night. So Corona is definitely quite quite a reality here. My father just got his first vaccination, which I'm pleased to hear about. I think it was the Pfizer vaccine. His girlfriend has also been vaccinated, but the people kind of near where I stay, there are at least four of them that have got it. And as I said, the one guy's wife's in hospital. I think she had a heart attack, a mild heart attack or a heart attack, went to hospital and caught it there, just like another friend of mine. So, yeah, I think certainly if you haven't been vaccinated, you don't want to go to a hospital for a while if you can avoid it. I haven't been vaccinated. I think we're going to come up in a month or two, something like that. I'm not particularly worried about it because I'm quite isolated as a writer. I'm not. I socialize quite a lot in April for my standards, but I don't think I'm kind of in lockdown even when there's not lockdown. So yeah, Snowline, we can talk on Discord. Hopefully get that sorted out. I don't know if those people are vaccinated. Someone else actually asked me. I think with the allegation or the suspicion of did they get vaccinated and then get corona. Millions of people are getting vaccinated, and I think of those who get vaccinated, you're not going to get corona from getting vaccinated. Snorky says a co-worker aged 50 died in early April of COVID, just 2 weeks before her eligibility came up for vaccination. I remember seeing something on TV where they said the risks of vaccination are far lower. So getting the vaccine, there is a risk. Getting the vaccine, there is a risk, but that risk is tiny compared to the risk of not getting vaccinated. Christine says, I'm vaccinated and it has helped me a lot with anxiety. Okay. Laura says, my extended family, and many close friends caught it last year. Thankfully, not my immediate family. Now we're all vaccinated. Barbara Henninger in California, the state is giving incentives for getting the vaccine. Everyone has been vaccinated gets entered to win $50,000. Wow. You can also get $50 grocery store gift cards. Okay. Pink Mink Studio, I think you're in Poland. It was the same here, getting virus at hospitals. Lady Zaga, I hope you know that the vaccine does not protect you from getting COVID. Doesn't it? I think I've got to hedge what I've just said there, or I might get into trouble. I've just read what somebody wrote. That's not really my view. I don't believe that it doesn't give you protection. I think something that does give you kind of protection, not like a vaccine, but boosts your immunity is sunshine. I think exercise and sunshine is going to boost your immunity in the same way that you don't get colds or flu in summer. I think there's a similar element to that in this. I'm not saying run around in the sun all day and you'll never catch COVID. I'm just saying your immunity will probably be stronger if you getting exercise and getting that vitamin D. Victoria says, yes, I have your books. Okay. So Victoria, we're gonna have you on a Zoom. Stephanie, I know you've also read Neverest, or maybe even Discord, and we'll try and set that up in the next couple of days, right? A kind of a interactive discussion. Maybe I'll talk to you guys a little bit about Neverest 4 and the Sherpas when we do that. Barbara says you can get vitamin D by sunshine or supplement. I was the same. 3 days I had flu-like symptoms after the first dose. in spite of, because of never a better time to get healthy and stay healthy. Yeah, if you in summer get a bit of exercise, rather a little bit of exercise than trying to go big, but then you end up not doing it. Okay, well, I think I need to get going. Thank you to the mods. Thank you to those who've contributed and participated. Thanks to those who've contributed money. There were a couple of you made like $20 donations. I really appreciate that. And guys, wherever you are, take care. And Timmy and I say good night. I'm going to be working through the night, trying to get something ready for you guys. I hope you found this episode interesting. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do. Okay, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey, Timmy, we'll see them next time. Okay, cheers, guys.